You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. Welcome back to the second part of this special Encore series featuring Operation Shadow Game, How the DEA Broke the Tijuana Cartel, a program that originally aired back in 2016. A special aspect of this particular program is that the 4 agents involved in taking down the Tijuana Cartel during a drug smuggling seizure in 2006 is that we get to hear from each of them and their role in this case. Part 2 of this series details the earliest days of the investigation involving local street gangs and others involved with the cartel in and around the San Diego area, in addition to corrupt individuals working for the cartel in Mexico. To find further success in progressing this case, agents talk through the importance of joint cooperation with Mexican law enforcement officials and DEA agents. And now for part 2 of Operation Shadow Game, How the DEA Broke the Tijuana Cartel.
So, questions for the panel. So first I'm going to start with Steve. As a former probation officer who transitioned to the task force, you're very well positioned to answer this question. How did loosely connected U.S. street gangs become so deeply involved in the operations of the AFO, a hierarchical drug cartel? And what role did they play in terms of the drugs? In terms of, were they operating as drug distribution on the U.S. side?
All 4 of us are from San Diego. Most of us were raised there and we understand the culture. San Diego, it's a beautiful town. It's a very safe town, but there are lower socioeconomic areas. And in those areas, we do have street gangs. We have black street gangs. We have white street gangs. We have Asian street gangs. We have Hispanic street gangs. Most of our Hispanics in San Diego are Mexican. And so we have, what the gangs will do is they'll take their neighborhood where they're from, and they will take on that name as the name of their gang. In our particular case, and it's a very unique exception in this case, the Arellano Felix case, there was the Logan Heights street gang. Logan Heights street gang had different factions of Logan Heights, but when the poop hit the fan, they would all come together and bond as Logan Heights. And it was a street gang. It was the largest Mexican street gang in San Diego. It still is. And they're Sureños. They're Southern California gang members. So they identify as Sureños when they go into the prison system. You have street gangs. When you go into the prison system, you have prison gangs. When you go into the prison gang as a Southern California street gang member, you become a Sureño. You no longer throw up the sign of your neighborhood, Logan Heights or Shelltown or Wilmas up in LA. It's you have to back the Mexican mafia, which controls the Southern California street gangs in prison. If you don't back the Mexican mafia, then you're preyed upon. When you get out, you're preyed upon. So you become a pawn of them. And so working probation, working in institutions, starting with juvenile hall, working juvenile camps, and paying attention to the gang members, I became an expert on a particular gang, and it was Logan Heights. As a probation officer, I supervised, there was a period of years, and when I first met Juan Martinez in 1991, I was fresh out of a group of intrusive probation officers. We intrusively supervised gang members in our community, and we targeted the worst of the worst gang members. We picked and chose who we supervised. And we would go out into the community, into their neighborhoods, to the street corners where they hung out. And if they were displaying certain colors, certain graffiti, if they were hanging with certain individuals, we could arrest them. So that was my expertise in the institutions out on the street, supervising people on probation. In 1992, an event occurred where Jack Robertson, he was a case agent of the Arellano Felix case in the earliest inception of it in 1992, walked across the hallway, and I was a probation officer, fresh on a DEA group, a DEA team, narcotics task force team, composed of federal, state, and local agencies. And Jack came to me and he said, Steve, I've got an informant running with the Arianos down south. And he says they're killing people. They're in a battle with this drug lord, Chapo Guzman from Sinaloa. They used to get along, but they don't get along anymore. There have been attempts on the Chapo's lives in Mexico City and Sinaloa, and there have been attempts on the Arellano Felix brothers' lives here in Tijuana and San Diego and LA. And what has happened is the Arellanos have recruited gang members from San Diego, from the Logan Heights street gang, to act as enforcers. And I go, well, that's unusual. You usually don't see that. They usually protect their neighborhood, and they're loyal to the Mexican mafia if they go to the prison system. Well, Jack goes, well, this is a unique situation, Steve. There's a kid by the name of David Barone, who is a street gang member from Logan Heights. He's a prison gang member from the California prison system because he killed somebody at a very early age, was tried as an adult, went to San Quentin, put in his work, did some hits, did some murders for the Mexican mafia in prison and out on the street. And he's very charismatic. And while serving time in the federal prison system for an automatic weapon that he had, he met a guy by the name of Gustavo Rivera. And he also met a guy who was the brother of Kitty Paez. And in the prison system, David takes these two high-level traffickers under their wings who was working for the established cartel at the time. I think it was Carl Payan, Doctor. Took these two guys under the wing that weren't savvy with the prison system and protected him and did things for them. They saw that he was ambitious. They saw that people respected him. And so they recruited him. At the time, this was the late 80s, when they met at FCI Phoenix. David was being looked at by us in San Diego. He was a 1% hardcore gang member that killed, that murdered. And when he was out of custody, the rest of the gang members would flock with him, and the violence levels would go up. So our strategy in our law enforcement community in San Diego was to target the 1%ers, take them out, take them off the street. David was illegal. He had felony convictions. It was a matter of time before we picked him up, gave him to immigration, and they deported him. And so that was one of the strategies that we were using. But he was also moving tons of coke. He was also moving dozens of pounds of methamphetamine for the Arellano Felix organization. And he finally caught wind of us, that we had gathered our team of law enforcement, and we were on to him. And so he fled south in 1991, 1992. And that event that Dr. Jones speaks about at Christine's Disco in Puerto Vallarta, where Chapo, at a meeting where they agreed to disagree, after the meeting, the Arellanos went to Christine's discotheque. Chapo stormed the discotheque, killed a lot of innocent people there that were partying. The Arellanos were in the bathroom. They escaped out of one of the vents in the ceiling. David Barone, the street gang member from Logan Heights, who had been recruited by Gustavo Rivera and Kitty Paez's brother, was there to help protect them and get them out safely, and then used his last bullet to kill one of the guys as they were coming on the perimeter, one of Chapo's guys. So after this event, and it's a very historic event in the case, Christine's Discotheque, November 8th, 1992, Benjamin Arellano Felix, the head of the organization, the toughest of the smartest of the five brothers that were actively involved, asked David, obviously I've got a problem with Chapo Guzman. I need brave guys like you. And so David went back to his neighborhood across in San Diego, 15 miles from the border, and started recruiting gang members, the toughest gang members he knew from the street, to go down and work for some very important people in Tijuana. And so these gang members in 1992, probably 50 to 60 of them, came down to Mexico and began to work as escorts and assassins for the Arellano Felix organization. It was an amazing thing because at the time in San Diego, 1992, 1993, we started getting these organized crime type hits. Guys tied up with two bullets to the back of their heads. Guys being killed with automatic weapons, AK-47s, AR-15s. It was real quiet in the neighborhood between the gangs, but these were mafia type hits. And so all the police departments were getting together, and we were scratching our heads. And in San Diego, we have a very good law enforcement community, and we work well together for the most part. And we were trying to figure out why the increase in the homicides, why the increase in the dynamic. And Jack was starting to put the pieces together for us. So me as a local agent working with DEA, I took Jack over to the San Diego PD and introduced him to the gang detectives there, the street cops. And Jack developed a rapport with the locals, and he's really good at that. And that's why he was so successful in this case. God bless him. And we started identifying the gang members working for the cartel because they were doing hits on both sides of the border, trying to kill anybody associated with Amado Carrillo, with Chapo Guzman, Mayo Zambada, Huero Palma, anybody associated with the Sinaloa cartel or anybody that was loyal to them. And these gang members would go down to San Diego, and they were kept in 4 different houses. They would call them offices. They were equipped with automatic weapons, with street clothes, with police clothes, with ammunition, extra magazines, grenades, tactical gear, armor, and they were trained by all factions of police and military in Tijuana. And they were taken to a range on a consistent basis where they learned how to shoot at moving targets, at stationary targets, how to stay away from crossfire, very tactical situations. And this has been reported to us by many of those that have cooperated since. But they would go on missions. The guys that knew how to shoot, there were a few of them, there were a handful of them, about 15. They would go on missions to kill anybody associated with Chapo, anybody siding with him. The Arranos were very spiteful, very animalistic brothers. They loved planning killings, and they loved talking about their killings afterwards. These gang members that were successful in killing anybody associated with Chapo were getting paid $15,000 to $25,000 cash for each murder that they did, each successful mission that they did. And they were getting paid in front of the other new enforcers, so that would whet their appetite. And we have witnesses after witnesses telling us, I saw this guy. I saw Dopey, Goofy, Doc, Sleepy, Happy. I saw them get paid $15,000 to $25,000 for this hit. And it became a concern to us because it was happening in our backyard too, both sides of the border. And in May 23rd, 1993, a couple of weeks before there was a Chapo Guzman sighting in Guadalajara. The Arranos had their informants, and they got their enforcers together. They got 2 groups of gang members from San Diego together, sent them down to Guadalajara a couple at a time, gave them some money, put them up in houses, gave them, in Guadalajara, they were given equipment. They had another group or 2 subcontract out of Los Mochis, Sinaloa, there in Guadalajara looking for Chapo. And Ramon Arellano Felix, David Barone was there personally to try to incite their guys to find Chapo and to kill him. And the reward was $2 million. So after about 10 days of looking for Chapo in Guadalajara, they could not find him. They were unsuccessful. They looked at quinceañeras. They looked at baptisms. They looked at the nice restaurants. They were in vehicles disguised as Pepsi trucks and Kentucky Fried Chicken trucks. And finally, they got wind. And at the last moment, they got wind that Chapo Guzman was going to be in a white Crown Vic at the Guadalajara airport. So on May 23rd, 1993, as a white Crown Vic comes into the airport, the gunmen from Los Mochis, from TJ, our gang members from San Diego unloaded on the Crown Vic, filled it full of holes, and it wasn't Chapo, it was a Catholic cardinal, Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, that was killed. In Mexico, if anything is held sacred, is Catholicism, especially at that time. And the Arranos became public enemy number 1. They thought they were successful. They boarded a plane. They went back to Tijuana, and they found out through the press, through their informants, that they had killed the wrong subject. And Ramon basically told the enforcers to scatter. So all the gang members came back to San Diego. Mexico had arrested one of the guys at the airport who was drunk and wasn't allowed on the plane. He gave up the street names of the gang members. We were able to identify them through the San Diego PD working together. Jack brought those names to the San Diego PD. We were able to identify the guys that he described as Dopey, Goofy, Doc, Sleepy, Happy, Grumpy. And we were able to give them real names, Logan Heights gang members. And we were able to arrest them on the provisional arrest warrants that Mexico had provided and either deport them back to Mexico or extradite them back to Mexico. So those two events, the attempted murder of the Arianos at Christine's discotheque, where David saved the lives of Javier and some other very important figures in the Arellano Felix, to the murder of Cardinal Posadas Ocampo in Guadalajara on May 23rd. It's a short time frame, but in that time frame, dozens and dozens of gang members from Southern California, Sureño gang members, were trained as assassins, and they killed many people. So that was my invite into the case, providing Jack with that information, working the enforcers under the direction of Ramon Arellano Felix and David Baron. I was a probation officer at the time, but again, it whet my appetite. This is what I wanted to do. This is what I was trained to do in law enforcement, was to work the hardcore guys, and I didn't want to leave it. So I did switch careers for mainly that reason, because I wanted to continue to work the case with Jack Robertson, with Dave Herod, with the dozens of other people that have helped with this case, and I'm still doing it to this day. So, and it's been a great ride and a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, and I've met some great people. We spent 3 hours eating lunch today, just catching up.
That was fantastic. I'm so glad.
Can I make a quick
comment?
comment?
Of course, yeah.
You probably noticed Steve's a pretty polished speaker. He's a nationally recognized expert in this area, and he teaches all over the country. So you may have even seen pictures of him or sat through a lecture before. He knows more about this particular area than anybody I know. One interesting footnote to all this is when later on, when some of the high-level cartel figures were arrested in Mexico, subsequently extradited to the U.S., we got to talk to some of them. There was resentment on the inside, some of the high-level leaders in the cartel against the gang members, because they thought they weren't professional. They'd get coked up. They'd shoot first, ask questions later, which may partially explain the Cardinal shooting. So we, from the outside looking in, we thought it was one cohesive organization, but as in all organizations, there's a little bit of resentment, a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of infighting.
Mm. No, that's fantastic. And I was actually going to transition my next question to you. On that theme of binational, one of the great things about studying Mexico is everything. There is corruption in Mexico, and there are great cops in Mexico. And so I want to direct this question to Al. Could you tell us about the death of Mexican law enforcement official Jose Pepe Patiño Moreno and the brutal violence the AFO used to establish their hold over Tijuana?
Yeah, happy to go into that. Are there any current or former law enforcement officers in the house tonight? I recognize the look, and thank you guys for your service.
The ones with the beers.
Yeah, the ones with the beers. So first of all, and there's a reason I asked that question. I think it's important to establish, we were talking about this earlier, establish what kind of circumstances we work under when we're working in Mexico in particular. And you guys know, you law enforcement personnel know how difficult it is to investigate a criminal organization domestically, and all the tools you have at your disposal to penetrate that organization, to investigate it, to gather evidence, and to bring it to justice. Working against a criminal organization that operates in a foreign country, where we as DEA agents were working under kind of a limited authority. And you guys, Manny and Juan, jump in here and help me just lay this groundwork, if you would, if I get something wrong. U.S. law enforcement does not have enforcement authority in Mexico. We can't kick doors. We can't walk up and grab somebody and arrest them and throw them in jail. Everything we do...
Not officially.
Not officially. Juan's been working there a long time. He knows the tricks. Everything we do down there is by, with, and through the counterparts and the colleagues, our Mexican law enforcement, Mexican military. And so a lot of times we recruit sources, we gather information, and then we go to our counterparts, give them the information, and that's a whole, just that exchange right there between us and our information and how we got it, giving it to the counterparts is a dance. And these two guys are better at it than anybody I've ever known. You have to protect your sources. You have to, as Nate referred to, the corruption level down there is astronomical. I think Manny's going to get into that, a little bit of that in a minute with United Eagles. We who thought that we knew how bad the corruption and the level of violence was down there, we're surprised by that operation. So anyway.
This is where I'd like to chime in because I still work in Mexico. So this is my disclaimer. I work with a lot of very honest, brave law enforcement officers in Mexico.
As have I.
But not all play by the rules. And the ones that have not, we're very fortunate, have been incarcerated, and justice is having its day.
And 2 or 3 of those were involved in this operation I'm going to talk about, or this incident. So the way you work in Mexico, I was there when Pepe Patino was killed in April of 2000. We have called the Vetted Group. It's a group of Mexican federal law enforcement officers who've undergone more stringent background investigations, polygraphs, so that we can keep them somebody we can trust, who is our right arm, our tie-in to the Mexican government. So we had a vetted group down there. We kept them they had a house, a rental house that we rented for them. We provided money for them and tried our best. We cultivated a professional and personal relationship with these guys. They were our inject into the criminal side of, or having an impact on the criminal side. Now, they weren't the action arm. They were more like intelligence gatherers, but they were fully sworn, weapons-carrying federales, PGR agents. But there was another action arm that they worked with. In other words, if we had actionable information, then we would tell our vetted group. The comandante, his name was Miguel Angel Serrano Garcia, El Capi, at the time. And we would tell Capi, and he would go tell comandante of the action arm, a guy named Cesar Jimenez Reyes, and those two names are 2 of the guys that Juan was talking about. And Cesar Jimenez Reyes would take his crew out and kick the door. So that's kind of the way it went. That was how we did business back then, and I assume some slight variation is the way it still is. So in late 1999, early 2000, Pepe Patino, who was a deputy attorney general in Mexico City, was assigned the job of investigating the Arellano Felix cartel. And did a couple of things, started to work. One of the things that he may have impacted was in February or March of 2000, Chuy Labra was arrested. And he was one of the major cocaine traffickers in partnership with the Arellano Felix organization. So he was sort of the first big guy to fall. And I don't know if it's coincidence, and I truly don't know this, whether Pepe Patino's crew found the information and provided it to the Mexican army who effected the arrest, or whether it was coincidence. So a lot of the successes down there, a lot of the arrests we made, a lot of the cartel leaders we were able to wrap up were a combination of everybody's effort. And I will say that back then, before 9/11, DEA was not the only agency even played down there. So that was the drug war. Drug war was the only war we had at the time, so we had help. So fast forward to April. My partner, Larry Roberts, and I were in Mexico City. I think it was April 9th, April 10th. And I got a call from from Capi's second in command, agent named Felix. And he called me and he said, "We can't find Pepe." And And we knew him. We all had met him. We all knew him. Some of us better than others. So I knew who he was talking about. And I said, so what time? He said we were supposed to meet him at Cesar's office this morning. Cesar Jimenez Reyes, who was the Comandante of the Action Arm. We were supposed to meet him there at 10 o'clock this morning. Well, it was 3 p.m. when he called me. So something was clearly wrong. So my partner and I got on a plane and went back to Tijuana. I think we flew in the next day. And by the time we got there, they had found him. Pepe Patino, another prosecutor. Yeah, I was trying to think of the procurador. Yeah, Licenciado Bernal, I think his name was, and then a Mexican Army captain who was along for security aspect named Torres Bernal. 3 of them were found at the bottom of a ravine off the road that connects Tecate, outside Tecate, between Tecate and Mexicali. And there was a car, they had pushed a car over the cliff. What happened, and you can, if any of you have had interest in the past or have looked at it in the past, it's all pretty much come out in the papers. What happened was Benjamin gave the order to have Pepe Patino picked up. And the interesting, and we knew it right away, because literally from the time you cross the border out there at Otay Mesa, where this is from the U.S. side, Cesar Jimenez Reyes' office was on the south side, literally, 3 minutes? Maybe a 3-minute drive from the border, safety of the U.S., relative safety of the U.S., to that office. He'd been intercepted in that 3 minutes. So we knew there was corruption, and we knew there was, so that's when we started to look at our counterparts, the guys we were working with, El Capi, and especially Cesar Jimenez Reyes, who we had already gotten information on, by the way. The Arellano's chief lieutenant, probably the highest ranking member of the gang, not named Arellano, was a guy named Ismael Higuera Guerrero, El Mael. Mael was the chief operations officer, and he had influence everywhere. He bought municipal cops, state cops, federal cops, military. He wiretapped people. He had intel centers. He knew, and all his informants, and he knew pretty much everything that went on in that town. Well, he had recruited Cesar Jimenez Reyes probably before we even got there. And so we had information from one of our sources that Cesar had been working for Mael. And subsequently, so fast forward, so this, Pepe Patino's dead. Horrific murders, 3 of them. If you saw the pictures, their heads were crushed. They tried to make it look like they were victims of a car that had gone over a cliff out on the highway, but our sources were telling us differently. And
they were beat to death with a bat, and then their heads were put in vices and clamped down and smashed the skull.
Subsequently, when we were able to, as I mentioned before, debrief some of the cartel members, cartel leaders, we corroborated this account. They had actually picked him up. Benjamin ordered Mael to do it. Mael's right-hand man was Efrain Perez Hasuenga. Efra's right-hand man was a former state cop named Jorge Aureliano Felix, El Macumba. So Mael called Efra and said, grab these guys. And Mael knew when Pepe Patino was crossing the border, because Cesar Jimenez Reyes, the Comandante of our action arm, was reporting directly to Mael this whole time. So they picked him up. Mael subsequently killed him himself. At least he hit him a couple of times with a baseball bat. And then when he had Benjamin on the phone, Benjamin Arellano, Mael called Benjamin and said, I have Licenciado Patino right here. What do you want to say to him? And Benjamin started yelling to him, why are you after my family? You're out of your league. You don't know who you're messing with. And Mael was getting nervous all this time, and he hit him with a bat a couple of times, and he grabs the phone, and it says, and tells Ben Hameen, he says, it's over, it's too late, they're gone. And so Ben Hameen hangs up, and Mael tells Ephraim Makumba, get rid of these other guys and make it look, make them go away. So that's the way it happened. Footnote in the fast forward, and there's Nate referred to a takeaway here about escalation of violence and arrogance. The footnote is Miguel Angel Serrano Garcia had also been corrupted by Mael. We began to suspect it at the time, working our sources. It turns out that Cappy, he was the leader of our vetted group, had responded to a tip to pick up one of Mael's workers, Abalon, who was subsequently killed in a helicopter crash. So Cappy's crew surrounded Abalon. Abalon called Mael. Mael sent people over there to talk to Cappy and gave him the option. And the option wasn't you can work for me or you can go and do what you want to do. The option was you work for me or things are going to go bad for you. So Cappy became compromised. And he was reporting to Mael everything we were doing. So we ended up arresting Cappy, or effecting the arrest. We couldn't do it. We cooperated with, fast forward. So Cappy's in jail. As far as I know, he's still in jail. I think he got 25 years. 2 years later, about a year and a half later, Eddie Bordone, another officer who worked down there, and I were in Orlando, Florida, debriefing an informant. A former colleague who I'd worked with in Tijuana from another agency calls me on my cell phone in the middle of the night and says, Cesar Jimenez Reyes is sitting in the border crossing station in, I think it was Nuevo Laredo. And I said, how do you know? And she says, I don't know. And then she hangs up. And but not before she gave me the number of the border patrol station. So I called him, and I called my former partner Larry, and we knew Cesar very well. Met with him dozens of times in his office. Got in touch with the detention, the border patrol officer there at Nuevo Laredo, and said, we think we know this guy. Mexico has an arrest warrant out for him. Fax me we couldn't scan it. Fax me a picture of the guy. And so I was sitting down there in the hotel in the business center waiting for the fax to come through. And it comes through, and it's a piece of paper with a black ink blot right in the middle.
Positive ID?
That's what I said, that's him, grab him. And so they, hoping that my former colleague's information was good. And it turned out to be, in fact, my partner called Jose Santiago Vasconcelos, who was another deputy attorney general at the time down in Mexico, who had been a personal friend of Pepe Patino. Senor Licenciado Vasconcelos flew PGR aircraft up to Nuevo Laredo, grabbed him. He's still in jail. So, significance or takeaway, that was kind of a tipping point in that as this organization did so many times, they went a little too far. Went a little too far, grabbed the raw, reached too high into the Mexican government, and they were out of control. Now, another side note, Pepe Patino, as far as I know, was clean. Things in Mexico get muddy, up in the as far as corruption. And there are different levels of corruption too. All I know is that Chapo Guzman later on would send us people who had information against the Arellano Felix. So draw conclusions that you will. I'm not saying I'm not
surreptitiously.
Surreptitiously, yeah. He would send people who, because he was bitter enemies with the Arellano Felix cartel, so he kind of has his fingerprints in some of this stuff, and that's just conjecture on my part.
It's part of the art of war. My enemies' enemies are my friends. So he figured, well, these guys are eager to do good work, and I have information against my enemy. I'll send an emissary who's disguised as a civilian or someone who wants to do good, and he'd give us information that we'd already had. They just take it to the next level where it's operational, and we farm it out to different counterparts that do the arrests, and many times it led into shootouts and actual
he's smart.
killings of Ariana people.
As always, thanks for listening to today's episode, and we hope you'll join us for the third and final part of this Encore series next Wednesday, December 13th. Thanks again for tuning into this episode of Encore, and stay safe out there. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.